Have you ever bought something for peace, only to watch it get turned into a playground for betrayal? What if the people who hurt you most weren't strangers, but the very sisters you grew up with? And what if, instead of saying anything, you stayed quiet until they broke in with bolt cutters? In the next 30 minutes, I'm going to share with you how a quiet woman named Jessica walked away from the guilt that raised her. How she reclaimed not just a cabin in the woods, but her voice, her boundaries, and the life her family thought they could rewrite. You'll hear the story of secrets, legal battles, and handwritten letters that arrived too late. But more than that, you'll hear how saying no more doesn't make you cold, makes you whole. My name is Jessica. I'm 35 years old, married, child-free by choice, and until recently, still trying to be the good daughter in a family that never really saw me. People often assume that if you don't have kids, you must have freedom. But freedom only comes when no one is pulling strings behind your back. I didn't grow up in a house of gentle words and calm dinners. No, our family meant chaos. 2 older sisters who knew how to demand attention, a mother who used guilt like punctuation, and a dad who disappeared into silence just to survive it all. So when I finally left home, earned my MBA, and moved to the edge of Denver with my husband Ethan, I made a quiet vow to myself. No more noise, no more guilt, and no more performing peace for other people's comfort. But family, especially mine, doesn't let you go without a fight. And sometimes it takes more than walking away to finally be free. I've always believed that peace isn't something you stumble into, it's something you build, brick by quiet brick. It means walking away from the very people who taught you what chaos sounds like. My name is Jessica. I'm 35 years old, married, and I don't have children. Not because I couldn't, but because I chose not to. You'd be surprised how controversial that one sentence can be at family gatherings. My husband Ethan and I live in a quiet apartment on the edge of Denver. We fill our weekends with slow coffee, long hikes, and conversations that never turn into shouting matches. And for some that sounds boring. But for me, it's peace. I didn't come from that kind of world. I come from a home where every conversation had a volume, where my 2 older sisters, Laura and Megan, took up every room with their drama, and where my mother believed guilt was the glue that kept us together. Growing up, it was like trying to be heard in the middle of a thunderstorm, so I stopped speaking. I learned early that staying quiet meant staying safe. But safety isn't the same as happiness. And silence isn't the same as peace. That's why, the moment I could, I built a life that was still. No loud dinners, no screaming kids, no drama over birthdays, casseroles, or who was bringing the potato salad. Just stillness. But there's something about being the quiet one. The one who doesn't come around. The one who acts like she's better. They always notice, even when you try your hardest to disappear. My mom used to say, Jessica, family is family. You can't just choose peace over people. But you can. And sometimes, you have to. That doesn't mean I stopped loving them. It just means I stopped letting them dictate who I had to be to earn that love. And I wish I could tell you that once I chose that peace, they let me keep it. But peace to them was an insult. And it all came crashing back into my life. With one summer barbecue that I should have never agreed to attend. Because that day, under a hot July sun and the scent of overcooked ribs, I saw something more dangerous than firecrackers or margarita spills. I saw the real reason I'd left in the first place. And it wasn't loud. It was quiet, and cruel, and waiting. It started with a phone call at 7 a.m. on a Saturday. Jessica, everyone's coming. It won't feel right without you. My mother's voice said, half hopeful, half guilt-laced like it always was. Could have said no. I should have said no. But Ethan looked up from his coffee, gave me that quiet shrug that said, I'll go if you really want to. And I caved. I told myself we'd stop by, stay for an hour, smile through the small talk, and leave before the fireworks, both literal and emotional, began. We pulled up to my parents' backyard just after noon, and the heat was already unbearable. Kids were running wild. Music was blaring. The The air was thick with grill smoke, sunscreen, and something sourer, tension. And there they were, my sisters. Laura, laughing too loud with a margarita in hand, called out, "Oh, look who decided to bless us with her presence. Got a CEO meeting later, Jess." She winked like it was a joke. But it wasn't. I forced a smile, the kind you paste on like a band-aid over an old wound, and pulled Ethan toward my dad, who was quietly soaking alone in the hot tub like he'd chosen exile over engagement. The thing about family events is, no matter how old you are, they pull you back into roles you thought you outgrew. Mine. The stuck-up one. The distant one. The childless one with the easy life. And then it happened. A group of kids, my nieces and nephews, ran screaming across the lawn toward a guest by the pool. One of them shouted, "13 push!" And suddenly the woman stumbled, soaked and humiliated. They howled with laughter. Before I could even process it, they turned on me next. All I remember is the blur of feet, squeals, and instinct taking over. I stepped aside, and they went flying straight into the water. The backyard fell silent for a moment before the shriek came. "Jessica, why didn't you catch them? They could have drowned." It was Laura. Her margarita spilled, her voice sharp. No one asked why they were unsupervised. No one thanked me for dodging what could have been worse. Just blame, glares, accusations. And in that moment I saw it clearly. This wasn't a family gathering. It was a trap dressed up like tradition. They didn't invite me because they missed me. They invited me so they could remind me who I used to be. Who they needed me to be. Someone smaller. Someone quiet. Someone easy to dismiss. That drive home was the longest Ethan and I ever took in silence. He didn't say a word, and he didn't have to. His hand on my knee said it all. "You don't deserve this. Not again. Just because someone calls it love, doesn't mean it feels like love. And just because they call it family, doesn't mean they get to treat you like furniture in your own story." But I wasn't angry yet. Not really. That would come later, when I found out what they'd been doing behind my back. With something I thought was mine. Something I'd built for peace. And they'd turned into profit. You see, peace wasn't the only thing they resented me for. And when people feel like you escaped something they're still trapped in, they'll do whatever they can to pull you back in. Even if it means pretending they own what you paid for. You know that quiet tension you feel when someone smiles at you, but their eyes say something entirely different. That was every conversation I had with my sisters after I turned 30. Laura was the oldest, the dreamer, always coming up with business ideas that never quite made it past the notebook. Megan, the middle one, overwhelmed mother of 3, married to a man who partied more than he parented. They lived loud lives. Messy, real, tangled up in diapers and overdue bills. And me? Well, they called it Easy Street. I earned my MBA at 27, joined a financial firm in downtown Denver, and saved like it was a survival skill. At 29, I bought my first apartment. 32, I married Ethan. We traveled when we could. New Mexico, Iceland, Italy. We didn't post to brag. We posted to remember. But that didn't stop the comments from trickling in. "Oh, must be nice not to worry about childcare. Only people without kids get to live like that. Wow, I'd love to have time to journal on a beach." They were always said with a laugh. But not the kind that makes you laugh with them. And I get it, really I do. It's hard to see someone living a life that looks free. When you're drowning in responsibility you didn't realize you signed up for. But what stung wasn't their envy. It was their assumption that my life was somehow selfish. Simply because I hadn't given it away. Because I didn't hand it over to diapers and carpools. Because I still had a bank account with my name on it. Because I chose differently. They never asked how hard I'd worked. How many nights I'd sat alone building that life from the ground up. How much discipline, how much sacrifice. Just a different kind of sacrifice than theirs. And here's the truth. The soft kind that stings a little. Sometimes people don't hate your success. They hate that it reminds them of the choices they never made. The irony. I never once made them feel small. But they couldn't stop trying to make me feel guilty for standing tall. And while I was busy trying to keep the peace, they were busy using something of mine, something I loved, something I built, as their own little gold mine. But I didn't know that yet. Not until a stranger's Instagram post would crack the whole thing wide open. Started with a photo. A quiet cabin I knew too well, tagged with a name I never gave them permission to use. And that's when I realized they hadn't just crossed the line. They'd been dancing on it for months. It was supposed to be my quiet place. A little A-frame cabin tucked into the pine-covered hills of Breen Ridge. Just 2 hours from Denver, but a world away from the noise. I bought it after a long weekend trip with Ethan. We'd stayed in a rundown rental, drank instant coffee on the porch, and watched the snow fall through the trees. And I remember thinking, I want this. A place that's only mine. That no one knows how to ruin. But I also knew my family. If I put that cabin in my name, there would be questions, judgment, accusations. Why do you need a second place when some of us can't even afford one? So I did what I thought was smart. I put the title in my parents' name, told them it was for future retirement, but paid for every inch of it myself. Down payment, taxes, maintenance, insurance. Everything. For a while it worked. My parents kept quiet. The cabin stayed mine, in spirit if not on paper. But peace, as I'd learned, never lasts long around people who don't understand boundaries. One evening, as I was scrolling through Instagram, I saw it. Photo of my cabin. Perfect angle. Sunset light. Porch lanterns glowing. The caption read, Hidden Gem in Breen Ridge. Hosted by Laura. Highly recommend. #Airbnb retreat. I stared at it so long my screen dimmed. First I thought it had to be a mistake. Maybe she was just visiting. Maybe it wasn't my cabin. But I knew that porch. I bought those chairs. I painted that railing myself the first summer. So I dug deeper. Airbnb reviews. Comments. Even had a friend book a weekend under a fake name just to be sure. And there it was, Laura's name. Over 20 glowing reviews. $350 to $500 a night. Photos of my kitchen, my fireplace, my books still on the shelf. And it wasn't just Laura. One weekend, Ethan and I made a surprise stop to check the heating system, and found a complete stranger grilling on the porch. Oh, Megan told us to come, he said cheerfully. She and her kids are joining us later. We got in the car, drove home in silence. That was the moment something in me shifted. I used to think silence was strength, that turning the other cheek made me the bigger person. But silence, when used too long, becomes permission. And kindness without boundaries. That's not love. That's self-neglect. Even people you love will take advantage of you if you teach them that your peace comes second to their convenience. I knew I couldn't undo what they had already done, but I could stop it from happening again. And the moment I made that choice, my phone lit up with messages that made one thing very clear. They never saw the cabin as mine. They saw it as theirs. And when I finally spoke up, when I laid the truth down plain and clear, what I got wasn't remorse. It was rage. Because people who thrive off your silence don't take kindly to the sound of your boundaries. For most of my life I thought being quiet made me kind. That not rocking the boat somehow made me better than the ones who screamed to get their way. But here's what no one tells you. If you never speak up, people don't thank you for your peace. They take it as a green light. 3 days after discovering what my sisters had done, I finally decided to say something. No more hints. No more soft questions. Just the truth. My mom asked to have a family meeting. No kids, just adults. So we showed up. Me, Ethan, Laura, Megan, and their husbands, Daniel and Brad, arms crossed like they were already ready for a fight. The moment I walked in, I could feel it. They weren't sorry. They were cornered. Mom started softly. There have been some misunderstandings. Let's just talk it through calmly. So I nodded, took a breath, and said exactly what needed to be said. I know both of you have been renting out the Breen Ridge house. I've seen the listings, the reviews, the bookings. I have all the proof. And from today on, no one goes near that cabin without my permission. Not anymore. Megan jumped up first. I didn't make money. I just let a few friends borrow it. How dare you? Enough, Laura cut in, not looking at me but at our mom. Fine. I listed it. But only to help pay for the kids' tuition. That cabin's in Mom and Dad's name, Jessica. It's not yours to gatekeep. I didn't flinch. You know I paid for everything. The loan, the taxes, the upkeep. Mom and Dad just held the title to avoid drama. This drama. Then, for the first time in a long while, my dad raised his voice. This cabin belongs to Jessica. Your mother and I only held the paperwork to keep it simple. That ends now. She decides what happens next. The silence after that was louder than anything said before. And that's when Laura, still trying, sighed and said, well, if you're not going to share the space, at least help with tuition. You're comfortable. No kids. You should. That word stuck in my chest like a splinter. You should. Because I didn't have kids. 'Cause I saved money. 'Cause I made different choices. They thought I owed them. And in that moment something snapped inside me. Not in anger but in clarity. Here's the truth I learned right then. If your kindness has no boundary, you are not kind, you are simply available to be used. And I was done being available to everyone but myself. I stood up, looked at my mother, the one person I still hoped would understand. I love you, Mom, I said gently. But I'm done playing the fool. Then Ethan took my hand and we walked out of that room. Out of the role they'd always boxed me into. Before we go any further, I want to ask you something. Have you ever stayed silent just to keep the peace? Even when your gut told you something was wrong? Share it in the comments. Sometimes naming the moment is how we finally take it back. Well, Jessica had spoken up. But she had no idea just how far her silence had already let them go. Because what came next wasn't a phone call or a nasty message. It was a break-in. And they came in with bolt cutters. I thought setting boundaries would be the hard part. Turns out, enforcing them is where things get real. 3 weeks after the family meeting, just when I started to feel the weight lift off my chest, I got a message from Brandon, the property manager I'd hired to watch over the cabin. 3 words. They got in. Before I could even reply, he called. Jessica, I just got an alert from the gate camera, he said, breath tight. 2 men bolt cutters. They snapped the chain lock and broke through the side entrance. They're inside. I've already called the police. I stood frozen in the kitchen, phone against my ear, heart pounding in my throat. They forced open the back door. Broke the hinges clean off, he continued. I saw their faces on the live feed. It was Daniel and Brad. Ethan had been setting the table. One look at my face and he crossed the room, took the phone gently from my hands, and finished the call himself. We left dinner with our friends in a daze. I don't remember the drive home. All I remember was the sound of my pulse and the anger in my chest that felt more like grief than rage. I had tried to be fair, tried to be civil, tried to give them the dignity of a conversation, and they gave me bolt cutters and a broken door. The next day, the Summit County Sheriff's Office confirmed the arrest. Daniel and Brad had been caught trying to disable the cabin's security system. They were charged with unlawful entry, property damage, and criminal intimidation. When I saw the footage, there was no mistaking the intent. They came prepared. Gloves, tools. Brad even looked straight into the camera and flipped it off, like he was daring me to do something about it. And that's when the last illusion finally shattered. This wasn't sibling drama. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a choice. Calculated, entitled, and criminal. And what broke most wasn't the door or the lock. It was the trust. What little thread of family loyalty I had left inside me. When someone shows you they're willing to destroy what's yours, just because you said no, they were never interested in love. Only access. My mother called me that afternoon, her voice tight and nervous. I heard what happened, she whispered. The boys, they got carried away. But Jessica, they didn't mean harm. They were just upset. And just like that, she went from asking for peace to pleading for leniency. They could lose their jobs. Brad works in security. If this goes to court. I listened in silence, then finally said, "Mom, they broke into my home. They damaged my property. They tried to erase the only boundary I've ever stood firm on." She sighed, and I realized I was still the only one in the room who saw it as wrong. That night I sent an email to my attorney. I wasn't looking for revenge. I was looking for protection. Because now this wasn't just a broken gate. This was a turning point. And I was done giving anyone the chance to cross that line again. That night, after the break-in, Ethan sat beside me as I scrolled through the police report. The cabin's rear door splintered. The chain-link gate cut clean through. The security panel ripped from the wall. And the camera footage. Well, that was the final straw. He looked at me and said softly, "Jessica, I know you love your family, but this has gone too far. If you want to walk away from all of this, I'll support you, completely." And that's when I knew. This wasn't just about them anymore. It was about me. And whether I was finally ready to stop making space for people who never respected the room I gave them. So the next morning I called Charlotte Green, my attorney. Straight-talking, sharp-eyed, and calm in the way only people who've seen too many betrayals can be. I asked her to represent me in all communication moving forward. I also requested a restraining order against Daniel and Brad. No contact with me or my property in any form. I wasn't seeking drama. I was seeking distance. And sometimes you need legal walls when emotional boundaries keep getting knocked down. About a week later, an envelope arrived at my office. Inside was a short letter and a bank check for $5,000. Signed by Daniel and Brad. The note was brief. They admitted to the break-in. Said they were acting out of emotion. Asked me not to take it to court. They offered to sign an agreement, they said. "Anything, just please. Don't destroy our lives." And for a moment I felt that old instinct stir inside me. The part of me that always softened. That always considered everyone else's consequences first. But then I looked at the check. $5,000. That was the cost they'd attached to my peace. My trust. And it wasn't enough. So Charlotte drafted a civil settlement. It was clear and firm. Full cost of repairs. $2,500 for emotional distress. All legal fees covered. Permanent no-contact agreement. And a clause. If they ever violated it, the criminal case would reopen immediately. She looked me in the eye and said, "You don't need apologies. You need accountability." 3 days later, they came to her office with their lawyer. Charlotte told me Daniel tried to bargain. He shut him down. "We can take this to court," she said. "But if we do, we'll bring everything. Texts, rentals, the camera footage. Even the part where you flipped off the security system." Daniel fell silent. Brad never said a word. They signed. And just like that, the line was drawn. Here's what I learned that day. Kindness doesn't have to mean weakness. And strength doesn't have to mean anger. Sometimes strength is a signature. A boundary written in ink. A decision that says, "You don't get to hurt me again," and call it family. I thought that would be the end of it. But healing is never that simple. And sometimes, closure doesn't come from courtrooms or contracts. Sometimes it comes in the form of a handwritten letter. From the one person I thought would never understand. About a month after the settlement was finalized, I came home to a small, padded envelope sitting on my doorstep. No return address. Just my name, written in handwriting I recognized immediately. It was Megan's. I didn't open it right away. I left it on the hallway table for 3 days. Every time I passed it I thought, what could she possibly say now that would change anything? But on the 4th night, something in me softened. Maybe not forgiveness, but curiosity. So I made myself a cup of chamomile tea, sat by the window and opened it. Inside was a long letter. 4 pages front and back. No excuses. No finger pointing. Just words I never expected. She admitted everything. That she'd known what Laura was doing. That she'd let others use the cabin to feel like she had something of her own. That she'd told herself it was harmless, because I had more. But what stayed with me the most was this line. You've always reminded me of what I never had the courage to choose. A life I built for myself. She talked about the pressure. The way family pushed her into early marriage, into motherhood, into being the one who always says yes. And how, somewhere along the way, she started resenting people who had the nerve to say no. It wasn't a perfect letter. It didn't fix anything. But it was honest. And honesty, when it finally arrives, doesn't have to be loud to be powerful. I folded the letter gently, tucked it into the drawer of my nightstand, and didn't respond, because sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is acknowledge someone's growth without inviting them back into your life. Here's what I've learned. Forgiveness doesn't always mean reconciliation. You can let go of the weight without letting the person back in. You can find peace in the space between distance and grace. I never wrote her back. Not because I was angry, but because the version of me who would have rushed to fix things no longer lived here. The new me had boundaries. And letters, no matter how heartfelt, didn't cross them. After that, the silence finally felt like silence. Not punishment, not tension, just stillness. And with that stillness came something unexpected. Clarity. Because while the cabin had been the center of so much chaos, I still hadn't decided what to do with it. And what I chose next wasn't just about real estate. It was about freedom. After everything, the break-in, the court settlement, the letter from Megan, the question still lingered quietly in the back of my mind. What do I do with the cabin now? It used to be my refuge. The one place I built for myself. A sacred space where no one expected anything from me. But now, every corner of it held a shadow. The porch, where strangers grilled burgers like it was theirs. The lock, where bolt cutters carved through trust. Even the bookshelves, once peaceful, felt like memories borrowed and returned with stains. For weeks I debated. Sell it, keep it, burn it to the ground and start over somewhere no one could find. But healing doesn't always come from getting rid of something. Sometimes it comes from reclaiming it. So instead of selling the cabin, I hired Brandon, my property manager, to do more than just maintenance. We installed new locks, cameras, motion lights, and fencing. But more importantly, we installed rules. No entry without written permission. No access code shared. No unspoken invitations. It was the first time I felt like I truly owned that place. Not just on paper, but in power. And something shifted in me too. I began writing again. Not for work. Not for approval. Just writing. Journals. Little stories. Notes to myself about boundaries and silence and love that doesn't come with strings. Ethan and I took a weekend road trip to Santa Fe. No cell signal. No family calls. Just quiet conversations, sunsets, and air that didn't carry old weight. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something I hadn't felt since buying that cabin. Here's the truth I held on to. Peace isn't just about absence of noise. It's about presence of self. And sometimes to truly reclaim a space, you have to reclaim the part of you that once lived there freely. The cabin wasn't ruined. It had just been redefined. No longer a hiding place, but a home where I set the terms. I still get calls from my mother sometimes. Brief, surface-level chats. She tells me about a new cake recipe or Dad's latest walking routine. She never brings up the cabin, or my sisters, or what happened, and I don't ask. Because closure doesn't always need explanations. Sometimes it just needs a decision. And the one I made next wasn't just about them. It was about me. And choosing a version of myself that no longer asks for permission to be at peace. There's a difference between leaving and letting go. I'd walked away from family gatherings before. I'd driven home in silence after being blamed, mocked, or dismissed. But this time this was different. This time I wasn't just stepping away for a weekend. I was closing the door and choosing not to reopen it. My mother still calls. Not often and never about anything deep. She tells me about the flowers in her garden, a new workout Dad is trying, or the almond cake she's baking for the church potluck. She never brings up Laura or Megan. Never asks if I'll visit. I think in her own quiet way she knows. She's grieving something she can't say out loud. And me. I'm learning to stop grieving the family I hoped they'd be. One afternoon, as we ended another short call, she said something that caught me off guard. "You sound peaceful, Jess. I can hear it in your voice." Smiled. "I had to learn it from scratch, Mom. But yeah, I finally am. And I meant it. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't living to be understood, or accepted, or forgiven for choosing differently. I wasn't shrinking myself to fit into a role that never suited me. I wasn't twisting silence into sacrifice. I had drawn a line. And this time I wasn't stepping back from it. Here's the quiet truth. Sometimes walking away isn't about giving up. It's about growing out of old roles, old wounds, and old rules that were never meant for who you've become. I'm still the youngest daughter. Still the different one. Still the one who doesn't come to every birthday, who doesn't bring a casserole, who doesn't try to fix what's broken. But now, I'm also the one who sleeps peacefully, who walks freely, who lives on her own terms. And that, I've come to realize, is the version of me I always wanted to be, but never had permission to become, until I gave it to myself. What happened after that isn't dramatic. It's not a twist or a cliffhanger. It's something even rarer. A quiet life reclaimed. Because this story doesn't end with revenge. It ends with something more powerful. A woman choosing herself. Finally, fully, and without apology. Thank you so much for staying with Jessica's story until the very end. If there's one thing we can take from this journey, it's that boundaries aren't walls. They're doors we choose to lock or open. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is close the door on the people who keep walking all over your peace. Because real love, family or not, should never come at the cost of your self-worth. If this story moved you, take a moment to share how it made you feel in the comments below. Maybe you saw a bit of yourself in Jessica. Maybe you've had to make a hard choice like she did. Whatever it is, your voice matters here. And if you'd like more powerful, real stories like this one, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. We've got more heart-shaking stories on the way. And I'd love for you to be a part of this journey. Until next time, take care of your peace. It's the most expensive thing you'll ever own.